us, and I see Martha is out there, excellent, and I see Dr. Nelson is out there, excellent. So you and anybody and everybody, please do chime in if you have a question, if you want us to clarify anything, if you have a comment you want to make, right? If something strikes you and you're like, hey, this reminds me of this, and or I'm making this connection to what you're talking about to something I read, please join in. And as always, I just really want to acknowledge the sensitivity of the topics that we're talking about. This can hit home to a lot of us. We've all had our lived experience, and there are some things in here that one doesn't have to be an enslaved woman to relate to. As horrible as Harriet Jacobs' experience is, it's terrible that a lot of these things that she's talking about outside of the setting of being enslaved are still occurring. So with that said, let's get started. I thought I would start off our topic. This is a sociological, basically look at the incidents of the life of the slave girl here. So that's what we'll be taking a look at today. And one thing, especially for those that are really immersed in this book and might be watching this later in time, we've got 1 hour, right? And so please forgive us. We are going to try to be as nuanced and specific as possible and really try to offer a great discussion here. And we've got a professor from the sociology department. How long have you been teaching at STC?
20 years.
Okay, so we've got I've been teaching going on 17 years. So we've got 37, almost 40 years. That goes way back to the Ford administration. No. The probably Bush 1 administration, right, of experience here to go through this. But yeah, 1 hour, and it's a big topic, right? Sociology is a big topic, and there are a variety of themes that we could probably address. We're not going to get to all of them. So please give us some grace, and we're going to do the best we can with the time constraint. And believe me, we could probably talk about this for the next 6 hours, but we'll have mercy on all y'all out there. So I thought I'd talk about, open it up by just explaining. I think a lot of students can probably guess what history more or less is about, or philosophy is about, or math is about, but probably a lot of students, and I would imagine just a lot of people in general, just don't have any idea what sociology is and what it can do for people just as college students, do for them, what it does for this college and what it does for society. So if you can give us maybe a good 5 minutes or less just description of sociology in general and what you do as a sociologist.
I mean, yes, it's usually the students. I mean, since we know, we kind of assume sometimes everybody knows, obviously not, that many. And I hear students so many times like, well, my friend recommended me. I don't know what was this about, right? So sociology, as we say, like study of society, but what is that? It's like you cannot see, touch. We just keep saying that learning how societal factors is influencing human behavior. So the idea, like when we go through, especially introduction to sociology classes, we just go like from our culture to our socialization, to our gender, to our race, our class, and many, family, different institutions, religion, they're all influencing our behavior. So knowing all of that, which we call it kind of social structure or society, I guess, kind of, if I wanted to simplistically say. So knowing all these different part of our society, then we can learn about the, kind of human behavior, how we interact, how we learn from the society. I don't know. It's just if they wanna, if I kind of tell my students also, if you see some certain social issue, it could be a social movement, or it could be some maybe the what do you call I'm drawing a blank. Any kind of in the social movement, social resistance, don't think that it's happening in our society or is unique to maybe just us. That when you study the society and know about how the fundamentals of society works, then you're gonna kind of go little deeper understanding, and it's going to give you a power, especially like sociological theory. Instead of looking at for instance, we discuss sometimes suicide bombing, that whole concept in a class, and it's just like you have to go beyond like, oh, these people are crazy, these people are crazy. No, you got to know what is the social forces, what happens, what is the impact. So I don't know, it gives you power of knowledge, but also better understanding your own, also the environment, your own society. Yeah, oftentimes the students, they come and not knowing what they're gonna learn, and they just kind of, oh, I learned so much about myself, or my environment, and so on and so forth. I don't know, it's kind of large, but it's I think is basically is knowing about your own society. It gives you power to understand, instead of just being on the surface of explaining things that people are crazy.
Oh, well, that's well put. I think that, yeah, for a student, I think that can, especially when you're young, I think that can definitely empower you as just an individual being a student in any college setting, taking a sociology class, of understanding your own values, your role as an individual in this greater society. And then, yeah, I think that's a great efficacy of sociology of, yeah, it might look like what that person did and hurt innocent people was just simply crazy. And certainly we can condemn it, but I think more empowerment comes of understanding the reason behind such a
Reason,
brutal
definitely.
act that somebody might
Exactly.
engage, or even as something as simple as I was going down the street and somebody was protesting something that I disagreed with. They're crazy. And then, no,
Exactly.
you get to understand that's an individual. They have a lived experience in this greater system with all of the systems within the structure.
Structure.
Capitalism, patriarchy, gender, uh, slavery, right?
It's
All of
many,
these,
yes.
yeah.
It could be from, religion to the class to gender to many things. I mean, even their topics come, it's about religion, and you kind of explain the theology, and students, they look at you. I'm like, look, I'm not telling you to practice. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm just, because I say, do you think that religious behavior influences people's behavior? They just not. I'm like, okay, we got to know where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And like, let's say nursing students, I keep saying, you're just interacting with all kinds of diverse background of people. You gotta, if they're kind of rejecting certain ways of treatment, knowing that piece of background
Oh,
information, it kind of help you to understand, and they might change their mind because you're understanding and you're just kind of explaining, oh, because of this and that. It could be, I'm just giving an example of religion, but it could be many other different backgrounds. So again, is knowing, and we also keep saying in sociology, we kind of look at patterns of behavior. So that's through we're sometimes obsessed with the statistical analysis, but if we see certain things keep happening again and again and again, that establish us that it's patterns of behavior. So that's something we can just understand again why is certain things are happening in the society the way it does.
yeah. Um, you might have heard of this individual. I don't know. He might be obscure. Emil Durkheim.
Emil Durkheim, yes.
No, I'm just kidding. Right. The father of sociology, right? Who really brought it into more of a professional setting. I thought we would kick off before we go into any kind of theme that you want to explore in this book, and I'll let that up to you. But just as a springboard of kind of getting at of what you're getting at from a sociologist, of these broader things that I think a sociologist is kind of looking at. And the first is just a couple of small quotes here. Individual conscious is the most sacred of all sanctuaries, right? And so you have this, you got individuals within a society. And so he's pointing out that this is a sacred area. This is basically where this is going to emanate from. And then another quote of his is the totality of beliefs beliefs and sentiments common to average citizens of the same society forms a determinate system with a life of its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I would like to basically conclude with the last quote, probably his most famous quote is, things perceived as real. So the perception of something, a belief system, right? Something only within your head, right? As an individual, become real in their consequences. And so
Mm-hmm.
just to take a theme from this book, white supremacy, right? That's only exists in people's heads. It's not real, right?
Uh-huh.
But the consequences of that belief system become real for
Mm-hmm.
everybody involved. Some people benefit materially, maybe
Mm-hmm.
not emotionally or spiritually, but they benefit definitely in wealth and all of that. Others are exploited, they're enslaved, they're brutalized
Mm-hmm.
by these consequences. So thank you very much for explaining a little bit about sociology. And yeah, I think it is something that can definitely empower students to understand their role in society, how they can contribute to society once they're done with
Understand.
this mess that they're dealing with here at STC. uh, no, but yeah, what theme would you like to explore, or how would you like to dive into this book?
I don't know. I mean, I took my, notes in the book. I kind of looked at, tried to categorize. I guess that's what I do. The first you kind of mentioned, you were telling me yesterday too, like, oh, how interesting that she was 6 years old, that she did not know she was a slave, right? And that is, I just like start thinking, that's another thing with sociology, is just, I mean, you're reading, you're analyzing, but the more there's a thought process. You gotta think and put based on the I guess teachings or the school of thoughts that where you can put some of the things that you see in this book. I think is socialization. I think basic concept, but that came to my mind because she did not socialize in a thing that immediately in her environment, which is yes, she was, born in the a slave society, but it's somehow that her father, like being such a, I think he was a carpenter handyman, and he
That's how
was,
she described him. I would describe him as a master architect.
yeah, it seems, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
like he
true.
was the guy that was with the blueprints and like, you go build that, get the hammer.
And then he was, yeah, like kind of selling his trades and then making money and try to, I think create a better environment for his children as much as he could possibly do within his power, right? And in that sense, that first 6 years, and then it's also the grandmother and all, they created in an environment. She was in very nurturing. It wasn't that what we usually maybe hear. So that's why that was a surprise to her. Her socialization was not is as maybe common as we hear generally structure that enslaved people went through. And that's why she kept saying, not to, I guess, diminish, but she keeps saying it's kind of, she mentions multiple times, the underscores the complexity of slavery. So there is we were discussing like a house enslaved people, or is the plantation, is on the a field. And she's saying, yeah, we didn't go through as much as the people in the maybe some of the a field, but still that was a cruel system. But I guess she didn't, if you were born into that right from the get-go, that you become aware quickly because you socialized in that whole plantation or being in the farm or working. And instead of is just her, she was in a much more nurturing environment. So socialization at young age, that she was protected to know that she was part of that cruel system. And that's why she was in shock, like, whoa, what's happening here? I don't know, that was my take
Yeah,
to look at that issue.
yeah. In many ways, you could say, to the extent possible within this family structure that she was raised in up until 6 years old, that she shared the same attributes within the system of family that white people did, right? They had,
Yes.
the father was the breadwinner. It seemed that the mother was ever present.
Yeah.
They were well fed, they were well clothed, they were educated to the extent that they could be at that young age, right? It sounded like a very happy, nurturing, loving environment. And then,
Environment.
yeah, and now she's finding this out, and probably at 6, she probably doesn't understand exactly what that means, except it's not good, not good at all. But she keeps going, she's goes to another mistress, who is very kind to her, teaches her to read and write,
Read them, yeah.
is very kind to her too, extraordinarily kind. But this is going to be basically, by the time she's 12, going to be kind of the beginning of the end of any kind of sense of innocence, of any sign of life that has any integrity as far as the outside world is concerned. She always maintains a sense of integrity for herself, but she's going to really understand what it means to be an enslaved young woman after 12 years old. And now
Oh,
we
yeah.
get to see the dichotomy of a system that I think sociologists take a look at, the family, and the differences between white family structure and black family structure, especially for enslaved people. Um, so, yeah,
Yeah.
what are some observations that you've had of how the family, both for white families and enslaved families, is depicted throughout this book?
I mean, obviously it wasn't. I mean, having a family I mean, it's a basic ways of looking at it. It does create some sort of an environment. We always say, what is the functions of family? And I mean, one of the first things students like, oh, it creates emotional and otherwise support and care for you and so on and so forth. While that is kind of expected, right? And in the case of the enslaved families, it doesn't even allow to, like, it's in the mouth of a I guess master or whatever, the slave owner, whether they could even have it. If they have it, whether they can, they don't even have power to keep their children.
No.
That was, none of that. And even marriage, they cannot marry anybody that they want to. I mean, she wants to get away from the doctor, and it's just like, okay, maybe it's gonna allow me to. I think is one of the ways sometimes, I think some of the enslaved women there just were looking for, maybe somebody could be a husband and they could, buy them, which is kind of a terrible way to put it. But that could be the ways to form a family. But even that wasn't, I guess, in her reach. So it's just no, it was, there was a power differential. I guess that was the one of the thing that we could see from the beginning to the end. There's power imbalances in terms of, yes, family life. And I mean, enslaved people, they tried to keep it as much as possible, but it was out of their control. They didn't have much of control to keep their family alive or keep their children. It was very delicate. It's just nerve-wracking. Like, there's no, that whole, what we say, what the families do, create emotional support. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, and as a parent, I mean, I can't relate to anything that she's talking about because I haven't even experienced even a fraction of the trauma as a parent that she's experiencing, or any of these other individuals that she's depicting in here. She does provide us some examples that really kind of, what I find really interesting is she really shows how slavery is not only affecting the enslaved families, but it also it infects the white families that are enslaving.
Oh, yeah.
And in this interplay, just to highlight how this affects enslaved families, just, we'll get to some of the more acute examples, but just the not simple, but from a father's perspective, in chapter 1, talks about how William Benjamin, William is the pseudonym in this book for her brother.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I forget the specifics of it, but basically his father tells him to do something, but the master told him to do something else. So he's going to listen to the master. And the father, this is Linda, Harriet's father, right? Basically scolds William. You listen to me.
Yeah.
I'm your father, right? And this is something that even at a young age, Harriet recognized of, oh, the integrity of our family
Okay.
is subservient to the white family that owns us.
Yeah.
How demoralizing that must be, especially for this is true even today, but there's expectation talking about the structure of a family. As a father, your role is to provide and to protect, right? And so this glaring example of a child who is savvy enough to understand really where the power comes from. It doesn't come from dad, it comes from the enslaver. And so how
Yeah.
demoralizing
Power.
that must have been for the father, this.
Yes, it's just, yeah, there's every which way. That's why it's so hard to say, even I guess a notion of family that we know of. There is, yeah, some sort of a power, power balance in terms of children and the parents, right? That's what we kind of also teach when we teach about family. There's like parents, they're equal, then children and whatever. And in here, yeah, the more the children is gonna, a report who's the head of the family. I mean, there's that. The other thing I was noticing, I think it was, I don't know, Mrs. Flint, and I think that she was getting sick, and that was like Aunt Nancy. I don't know the names. I might
There's a
be
lot of characters, yeah.
that's a lot of characters. And they eventually allow her to get married, and they kind of created this little cabin or whatever in somewhere in the house. But then the Mrs. Flint said, like, no, I'm kind of I think I'm pregnant, that I need water, I may need something every night, because the Harriet, I guess, is very attached to that Aunt Nancy. That, and they decided Aunt Nancy's, bed gonna be next to Mrs. Flint's, room, so she could attend. So yeah, okay, you allowed them to get married. Where's the marriage? Like, throughout her life, that Aunt Nancy person, it was always helping Mrs. Flint, and didn't really, how much of a wife or how much of a mother or how much of, what, it wasn't there. So they tried to have families, but it wasn't really,
It was,
sustainable because of
yeah.
the whole system.
And I get a sense that the families would have been a lot more connected, though, under these perilous circumstances, because, I mean, it really would be almost akin to being with a loved one who's about to die on their deathbed. You never know when my child could be taken from me any second. My
Yes.
grandmother could be killed any second, right? Just this. And I imagine mental illness obviously is going to be prevalent, that the person that is raising me might go crazy. It's just too much for one person. And so
Yeah,
it's, yeah, delicate. You said that earlier. Delicate is a perfect way of describing the enslaved family. It was
it
probably a
is.
very deep connection, but out of circumstances that, man, those connections definitely probably were very strong. Um, the other
Def-
thing too that is, I think, very interesting about kind of showing this interplay between these two models of families is how slavery affects the white family in so many ways. And so part of what she notices right off the bat when she's eventually sold to the Flints is how miserable and vindictive and bitter Mrs. Flint is. And basically, she said there's two ways that mistresses on the plantation can punish um, enslaved women. And basically, what she's getting at is, because it's just commonplace that enslaver men rape their enslaved women, they have children with them. And
Mhm.
so, of course, they are bitter. And so basically within the spectrum of things they can do, it runs between the wife convincing the husband to sell off this mother, therefore taking her away from her children, a terrible punishment. But what Mrs. Flint is going to do is just going to be bitter and angry and cruel, very cruel to Harriet throughout this book.
Yeah, she is. And actually, I was highlighted when you said that she was saying the young wife soon learns the husband in whose hands she has placed her happiness pays no regard to his marriage vows. Children of every shade of complexions play with her own fairy babies. And too well she knows that they are born unto him of his own household, and that because of that jealousy, they're trying to also wanna kind of trade them or sell them right away because of that jealousy. So they don't wanna. I mean, it is also disturbing in a way. I always get frustrated with this concept of jealousy because they're also powerless. That's mistress. I mean, you almost feel, and even I think Harriet kind of goes back and forth in some instances. It's just like, well, I don't know. She's so miserable. She knows that the husband kind of does that, but she doesn't know, that Mrs. Flint keeps taking on her anger from Harriet, but then the Mr. Flint doesn't allow it, and she gets much more angry. But of course, she knows to get angry towards your husband. But I know there's some, I guess, commentaries, but I'm on the phone. I don't see it much. So
yeah, no. Chris Nelson has a question that he said that we can get to later, and what I'm just kind of putting in quotes every once in a while from the book. Along the topic that we're talking about here from chapter 9, Harriet Jacob writes, I can testify from my own experience and observations that slavery is a curse to the whites as well as to the blacks.
right.
It makes the white fathers cruel and sensual, the sons violent and licentious. It contaminates contaminates the daughters and makes the wives wretched. Right. And so, yeah, that's a great point, right?
It is.
We can get very angry at these mistresses, but the empathy of understanding where they're coming from. Yeah, just to get back to your original point about what sociology is all about, on the surface, Miss Flint looks like a crazy woman. She indeed is, but there's reason behind this insanity. She's powerless.
She's
right?
powerless.
She can,
I mean, people might like, oh, do you want us to feel bad about? I mean, not saying just this is also people sometimes see black and white. It's not like I'm just saying, oh, feel compassionate towards Mrs. Flint and feel sad about it. We're not comparing the a powerlessness or trauma, but is also understand. It's just like there's a level of understanding because she doesn't have power. She doesn't know what to do, and I guess not articulate enough like Harriet to put it in a way to like, oh, how can I turn this around and maybe make it better? No, she continues to be miserable, I guess, rest of the time.
And one can have empathy with no sympathy for this person. Like, okay, I understand where she's
exactly.
She's a terrible person, but I get why she's that way. And that's where change can happen, right? If you're just kind of pointing the fingers saying you're a terrible person, how dare you? It's because you're white, that kind of stuff. And that is the whole problem with this is this idea that there's something essential to race, right? There's nothing essential to this. This is all made up, right? Yes, there's differences between people, but it's arbitrary that we say, oh, skin color. I know exactly what you're all about. No, absolutely not, right? We're products, as a sociologist would observe, of the structures in which we live in that have a great influence on our day-to-day behavior. And so if you can be aware of that, if you are a miserable person, right? Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm a miserable person. And so if I can understand, well, what made me a miserable person as an individual within the society, I can begin to go, oh, I'm operating on things that are just made up. It's just stuff in our heads. And so maybe kind of begin to be able to address that personally for myself and go, I could change this in myself.
Or I mean, you can change it in yourself, or it's because of the societal, forces that you have no control over, that it also makes you, miserable, and you try to find I mean, not you, but you see in general. I see it in
It's me. That's me. I'll admit it. Yeah, and then in turn, I think it can, you know, empower you, right? And then empower you maybe to do something about it, not just for yourself, but for other people in society.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's I mean, that's the bottom line, is just like why we learn about this, because that if we want to have, I mean, that's the bottom line of sociology, when we try to explain, oh, these, these social backgrounds for social forces, it, influences our behavior, or why people do the things the way they do. At the end, when you understand it, you might change it, because without understanding, how are you going to find a solution? You cannot find a solution without knowing underlying principles, or why is this happening. And another, I don't know if you, because I put something on sociological imagination.
Okay. Yeah. Can you define that for us?
Okay. What we say in the I mean, that's kind of the core. This is like a concept, comes from C. Wright Mills, sociologist, and Texas born. Uh,
Oh,
so
I
yeah,
didn't know that.
and C. Wright Mills have this concept of sociological imagination. Even though nowadays there's controversy, people say don't say imagination as if it's in our head, but it's actually it's happening. What he's saying, there are personal troubles and there's public issues. I was kind of mentioning to you. So what happens, that I mean, in terms of, I'll get to the book, but the personal troubles we might go through, this could be from unemployment to, it could be, some sort of a prejudice maybe that you're feeling, or is just any kind of other struggles, that something could be psychologically you're just struggling. But then it could be, as I said, it could be a marital problems, it could be employment problems, it could be different kind of problems that you may go through. But that we see that personal troubles and public issues, when personal troubles could be also a public issue. So when something becomes a public issue, us sociologists were interested in that. Like, personal trouble is what I say in my classes. It's obviously discipline of psychology might deal with it. Like, somebody's struggling, going through emotions, and they don't know how to handle that, and so on. And as a sociologist, I may not help the person individually, but I might try to understand again if that becomes a public issue. In that sense, when I look at this book, obviously Harriet is dealing with multiple issues, personal issues, which is her, sexual harassment, obviously through receiving from constantly from Mr. Flint or Dr. Flint, whatever. And then she's also try to find the way to get her children, or free her children, or protect her children. Then she confined in this room, and 7 years, I cannot even imagine that whole, what she was going through, and try to make it, struggle, and then try to get her freedom at the end, right? There's like multiple struggles that throughout the book she's going through. But when you look at it, is this really just a personal trouble? Just one sec, sorry.
Sure. Yeah, this is, I think it's the core of what we're getting at here as far as looking at this sociological. I was just thinking, to make it sense for our time, right? You might know a combat veteran who's having these personal issues, but this is a public issue because there are millions of combat veterans who might have been in combat and are suffering individually, that is causing lots of problems for our society that need to be addressed, and to provide help for these individuals. And I think a sociologist collects the data, they see what these people are going through, and offer to public officials, here's the data and here's a possible solution to these problems.
So yeah, in that sense, even though she goes through all of that, that is personal struggles. What all when you look at it, her autobiography, but what is the source of her personal troubles? It's not like in her head that she is just no. It's actually is broader societal forces in a historical context is creating that. So that's the whole source of everything is system of slavery.
Mhm.
So then, yes, something is personal trouble, but actually, when we look at it, the broader picture shows us no, that is actually a social problem. And therefore, just to help her, we need to change this problem that getting rid of the whole societal system is creating problem. And she's only luckily written autobiography that we can read, and there's handful of them, that there's like millions of them we don't know what they experience. And yes, we teach it in our history classes, what was slavery is about. But I think it kind of book like this is touches and it's kind of hits people, the reality of it. And fortunately or unfortunately, until we hear really the autobiographies or somebody's personal struggle, we don't really pay attention sometimes to the social problems. That's sad, but that's how it is.
Yeah, I mean, the value of this book here is
Yeah.
it's being obscured by my background there, but the value of this book is, yeah, it is easy to lose sight of the brutalization, the misery, the violence, the corruption of an entire society, politically, socially, economically. It's easy to lose sight of that when you're dealing with large scale numbers. Like, what does it mean that 4 million people are enslaved? Okay, that sounds like it was bad, but if that's all you know about slavery, and then you read a book like this, then you go, oh, that's what it looked like, right? This is what it did to enslave people. This is what it did to the enslavers. It corrupted them. It made them terrible cowards
Yeah,
who
I
had
mean
no integrity whatsoever.
that's why it's extremely valuable. Reading these type of books, it's I also mention now, I tell my students, okay, always take history we're taking, but American, African American history or Mexican American history or Native American history, or read a book. This could be one of the example, or D. Brown's like Bury My Heart in Wounded Knee. That was another book. I remember dropping the book and crying at times. It's just like, it's so disturbing, like how we didn't understand where people are coming from or what was the whole their struggle behind. So again, personal experience is intertwined with the societal structure. So it's not separate. So her personal struggles is part of that, is what we see it is that was societal issue. So that's why I guess sociological imagination, I feel it explains it well, because yeah, it's a personal story, but that's a real story of how brutal it was, that system of slavery.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, indeed. Right. Yeah. And I'm very grateful to the Common Reading Text Committee for selecting this book. It was a
Yeah,
great selection that I think really does lend itself to an interdisciplinary um, look at for a variety of subjects: sociology, history, philosophy. But yeah, excellent there.
it
Um,
is.
do you want to pivot to looking at another theme? We could look at the themes of Christianity. We could look at a theme of capitalism. But I think the ever-present of religion and Christianity, especially in this juxtaposition of how white people expressed it, how Black people expressed it, and how different individuals within these racial categories expressed it, and how it motivated Harriet much throughout her life, throughout this text, and how she was able to leverage the doctrine of Christianity and the teachings of Jesus to expose a lot of the hypocrisy that she's noticing from a very early age about what is going on and how this is affecting her and everybody involved in this system.
Yeah, I mean, that is just she on and off throughout the book. Yes, she questions how is these people are religious people? How is, how is this happening? And also, what I got my attention, how she actually what got my attention, her whole cross cultural perspective. Remember, she goes to England. When she goes to England, she kind of compares again I think the whole, I mean, I can look at it how we look at the stratification. When we teach a social stratification, we say there's different kind of systems that divide people, which is class, slavery, caste, class, and estate. And she sees like how people are poor and struggling, but then she also sees some of the religious uh, aspects of it, which is just say like, well, I wish that was a similar, practices, whatever she experienced there. She kind of sees it, that they're not like practicing what they're preaching in United States in a way. Nevertheless, I wouldn't really say this is about Christianity. Honestly, I am a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
So I know some of the theologies from, different, that's why I'm looking at understanding the theologies. But I guess I mentioned to you how, when I think is chapter 13, church and the slavery, that she's kind of going in through, I guess that was what Ned Turner's
Mm-hmm.
insurrection. And then after that people kind of worried, then they're trying to bring, okay, let's bring them to the a church and try to teach them to be what, submissive, or what was it, I mean, it was saying, I kind of marked here, your hearts are filled with the manner of evil. This is the evil to tempt to you. God is angry with you, will surely punish you. I mean, he goes on to this, what's Mr. Pike, Reverend Pike, I don't know who he is in the book. So when I was reading that, I kind of mentioned like how I say that kind of came to my mind, the Marx, that well-known quote that how religion is the opium of the masses. And it's just here, that's what it tried to serve, because they just want to control the people. They don't know how to, like, okay, maybe with the first, they didn't want them to maybe learn. But here they're just like, okay, let's teach them, but teach them the way we wanted to teach them. So we can keep them what? Oppressed, and they should just be grateful, or they should focus on what afterlife, and not try to, I guess, rebel or strike against us. And they have to see that, oh, this is God's will, that they have to, and this is not just Christianity, that also you see some forms of it in Islam. I mean, it's always, there's a groups of people, they try to get how do I say, it's hold of the, like, as if they have moral superiority, they can decide how certain things are interpreted, and they're just, divide people, or they tell us how to think or what to do. And that's, again, I think that was idea behind Marx's, that religion is opium of the people, not necessarily is, Christianity. I mean, he might kind of see that as an example, but it could be any other religion. That's what they, I guess, try to, like, some of the people who want to stay in power, that's what they try to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. This is definitely an example of the opiate of the masses. They're using this religion as leverage to try to control them. But what I find interesting is the main character of this book, Harriet, isn't buying it whatsoever. She's not confused about it. And she operates from this basically tangible sense of love that I think is clearly coming from this Christian doctrine. And so I find it real interesting to see the two kind of big models that she's providing, where basically you're basically seeing that for a lot of white people that are depicted in this book, it is just a matter of Christianity, religion in itself is just a matter of gaining social status. But
Mhm.
for Harriet, it's maintaining her dignity and self-respect in the face of constant oppression. And you would think that somebody in the face of this constant oppression would just be like, I'm beat, whatever. I'm just going to try to make my life as comfortable here as possible and do whatever it takes to keep these people happy. But she doesn't, right? It's like, no, I through this lens that I have that I've gotten from my grandmother, I got it from my parents, I've got it from even some former mistresses, when she was young, the mistress that taught her to read and write
Mhm.
taught her about the golden rule. So she mentions this. I find that very interesting that there's these two motivations for religion. One, I want to check boxes and show everybody that I go to church every Sunday and I pay my tithe. And for her, it's like, if I go to church, that's great, but it doesn't really matter. I'm operating from this power of love, and that is going to dictate my decisions no matter how uncomfortable that's going to make me, including if I need to spend 7 years in the garret of a shed, which is unbelievable.
Yes, and also what you're saying, it's because almost to the end when Mr. Flint passes away, and then she hears the news, and then she kind of goes through and she says, like, oh, my grandma, if it forgives him, she's a better Christian, but I still have. So she uses yes, she kind of looks at the religion from a different perspective, but try to better herself. Like control is just like, yeah, like try to become a better person, just kind of control her anger or resentment, but she's definitely the way she uses I guess religion from the loving perspective. But that's, as I said, that's for when you look at it, even today's world, that's how we're describing. On the one hand, there's groups of people, they kind of think they have the monopoly on religion and try to say this is how it is. The others, they're just like, no, this is about love and inclusiveness, and why you have all these judgment. So yeah, that's what is the balance, and she's on the good side of the balance, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, but I would probably venture to say of all of the world faiths, it seems to be a preparation for death, this very difficult thing that we all have to go through.
Yeah.
And we all know it's coming. And I think we all have a sense that when we try to decide what is right and what is wrong from our day-to-day decisions and what we should do and what we should not do, I think in the back of our minds, or even at the forefronts of our minds, we're thinking, how am I going to be able to sit at my deathbed or my last moments on earth and say, I lived a good life. I was kind to
Mhm.
people. I helped people out when they needed it, and I asked for help when I needed it. As opposed to, I mean, there's this terrible account in one of the earlier chapters when they're talking about neighboring plantation. One of the more crueler slave owners on his deathbed is screaming
Yeah.
out, bury me with my money. I'm going to hell. What a brutal death that man experienced. I don't know what kind of pain. I'm sure it was a painful death he went through, as most deaths are, but the psychological and spiritual turmoil that guy must have been going through, definitely I can empathize with him just by thinking that must be terrible. And no matter how painful one's death is, if you can sit, no matter where you get it from, if it's from religion or if it's just having a sense of understanding of what's good or wrong in the society and trying to act on the side of good, you can sit with your death and say, I lived a good life, and I'm glad, I was grateful for everything I had. What what I think is interesting too, in the last few minutes, we can briefly touch on a small topic of capitalism, because I think this is what kind of explains the motivations of a lot of these white people or the enslavers, uh, why they are so corrupted and are leveraging religion to either justify their actions or to try to control these people. They're,
Mhm,
I mean, it's obvious. They're just motivated by money and
mhm.
status.
Yeah, it's I mean, let's admit it, keeping the system going, slavery, it was profitable. And it's the more that they wanted to, yes, I guess I saw the Q is the Max Weber, like a Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism, definitely. No, it is, I mean, they just wanted to continue with this system of slavery because, they are I guess it's profitable and it's cruel, and they also didn't think, that's why you always think that how could they continue with this and not even think that they are doing something wrong. But that's whole the racism kicks in, because again, inhumane, making enslaved people as like inhumane, and that's part of the racism. But it's also they were thinking, yes, they were doing God's work. I don't know how this could be, but in the case of what I just saw, the Max Weber, uh, Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism, in a way that they are doing all the work just for that's God's work. They're just like, oh, God wants us to work hard, and God wants us to, uh, be, simple or whatnot. And then unintentionally, maybe they're putting back to their business and their business grow. But at the same time, I don't know how hard they were working in this case. That's obviously, it's debatable. But that's what it is. It's capitalism in a way. It's greed or money or power. It does not, people not easily could let go, and therefore there was justification of this system of slavery to continue. And probably they've been challenged and think like, what are we doing? This is wrong. It's treating people, terrorizing people, creating this system, and making I guess profit off of this terrible institution. But they just, try to justify they're doing God's work, or however they try to interpret that, the God's book.
Yeah, and to go back to that quote that I was just referring to, that's at least some evidence. It's hard to get in anyone's head and say, well, do they really think they were doing God's work, that kind of a thing. But I mean, that one, those last
Oh,
words on the planet, I'm going to hell, this guy is saying, bury me with my money. So clearly this guy knew that, yeah, I deserve to go to hell. That's where I'm going. What a pathetic thing to say for your last moments on earth, by the way.
I know. He
Um,
was, that's what I'm saying, is just yeah, there is still the element. I keep saying, when I compare Europe and US in terms of the work, and I keep saying, well, the Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism, because they create this guilt that taking vacations or whatever, that we're
of course.
lazy of some sort, or I don't know. It's kind of a different perception, and it's so ingrained. It's part, like, that's why you got to know the religion, because you got to know where the people are coming from, and there's that guilt, I guess, in people. That's why,
Oh,
I mean, I see it in terms of my, as an outsider, foreigner. I think in United States, is, American culture, it's taking vacations or having these leisures is seen as, at the time, and it's still lingering. It's seen as sin or something bad that you're doing, and you keep working and working and working, and the system is keep continuing without questioning, like, why.
yeah.
Anyway, I was kind of jumping my
No,
head from go
no.
to Max Weber to Harriet to who knows what.
Yeah,
Sorry, I keep jumping. I
yeah.
think one thing I also quickly want to mention, I kind of said it, um, intersectionality. We usually in sociology talk a lot about that. This is like actually this Kimberly Crenshaw, that's known concept that came from law and inequalities. But that's what they're looking at, the multiple forms of inequalities, or how we see that people might have different identities, and these identity, like we have identity of your race, your ethnicity, your a class, your gender. All of these are identities. And how I guess that we look at it in terms of intersectionality, they're not, if she is, for instance, a Black woman's experience in the time of slavery, we cannot, if we're looking at from today's these terminologies, intersectionality, we cannot look at her as just like, oh, it's a being an enslaved person is a terrible experience. Yes, it was terrible experience, but obviously we have to recognize the experience for an enslaved man and enslaved woman was somewhat different. I'm not saying better, worse, whatever, but it was different. So intersectionality, it kind of looks at that these different identities that is kind of intersect and interact, and it's kind of compound impact on an individual, or compound experience that somebody goes through. So her being, yes, enslaved a person, but being a woman. So women, obviously, they just had this whole harassment or sexual, assaults and abuse that many other Black women went through. And that is I think something needs to be mentioned also, because she is talking about that her being an enslaved person and how terrible it was. But I think her being a woman is important part of the book, like striving for her kids, try to keep her kids free, or try to get their freedom or her own. I don't know. There's it's a lot of layers.
Well,
and
definitely a sociology instructor could definitely assign basically assign a prompt to an extent of saying, identify examples of where she specifically points out intersectionality. Obviously, she doesn't use that word, but
no,
she mentions
exactly.
things like it is more difficult for a Black woman than a Black man to be enslaved, with the added element of sexuality and the problem of this patriarchal system that gives absolute authority of the slave master over the enslaved women. And then I think a big part of the motivation of her writing this book is to create solidarity with white women. And she mentions this quite a bit. And she'll stop the narrative and saying, white women of the North, Christian white women of the North. So you got Christian as an international subcategory of an intersectional subcategory, women, wealthy women, right? If you really claim to be a Christian, if you understand what it means to be a mother, if you understand what it means to be a woman, please listen to me, right?
Yeah, she
do
tries
something.
Definitely, she tries to connect. I mean, yeah, as I said, that's whatever, since late 1980s to 1990s and on, actually, that whole intersectionality we talk about. But she does. I mean, this book is perfect example of that. And she tries to connect with people. Okay, you don't understand me as a, enslaved person, but how about as a mother? How about is a good, Christian? And she does connect with some of the, like when she goes to North, escapes, and she has distrust the people, but some of the women she puts in high because they're just like, they helped me. They were a good example of, like, a Christians or whatever, however she sees it, or they understand how to be a mother. Like she was kind of the first person, I don't remember her name. She was saying, oh, she didn't tell them she was escaped, but then eventually she just said, and then they did, she did understand that. She just like, oh, and then she tries to help her. So anyways, yeah, definitely she also tries to connect with people with different, of her identities. It's just like, help me out here.
Mhm.
If you don't understand this, understand what we're going through here in terms of a mother or a good Christian or
Yeah.
many. Yeah, it's a lot because
It is a lot. Yeah.
more I was like reading, looking, and this part, or how also there were parts she, like how we talk about it, she still sees, yes, that even if the slavery, when it's ended, we just said that still continues, like in the North, how the prejudice and discrimination continued when she was going to the hotels with her a mistress, not mistress at the time, that
Employer, I
that
think.
whomever, yeah, the employer that she was working with, and she still saw, yeah, okay, we feel kind of maybe free, but there's this issue that I am also help, babysitting or being a nursing the baby, but I'm not equal to these other foreigners here. We should be equal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a clarion call for equality, and
Oh
definitely
yeah.
an expose of explaining the problem. So even, somebody that might have these pathological thoughts of prejudice and of sexism, I think there is an argument to be said here that, this is what it looks like. If you can't empathize with a enslaved, disempowered Black woman who was brutalized, look at what it does to, if just this hypothetical of a white supremacist. Well, look at what it does to the white families, right? And it's not as if this corruption of the white families just ended in the 1850s or 60s when slavery was over. It continued, and this mindset continued. It manifested in different ways, but it is definitely, the legacy of slavery is definitely has a corrupting effect on, the greater white culture. Could it definitely be argued from reading this book.
Well, I mean, slavery, or I mean, today when you look at it, also, it's any kind of inequalities. It is not like, oh, when you lose, I will gain, I will lose, you will gain. I mean, we shouldn't be looking at like this. When we do it, it does corrupt everybody, and you can never try to get to the better society that we strive on. I mean, there's no maybe perfection, but you can get, but it's always, oh, if I give it to you, then I'm gonna lose. Or it's just slavery was corrupting, but other forms of, I think, a stratification, I mean, is not as worse as obviously slavery. It still corrupts individuals, unfortunately.
Yeah. Plenty of examples in this book, students. So look for those corrupting examples in here. Do you have time, if we have any questions, to take any questions? We're past 5 o'clock, so I'm going to put the sign-in sheet here. But do you have time,
Oh,
Dr.
yeah,
Nelson?
yeah.
Question. This, I think, was back from when we were talking about when she was raised at 6 years old and didn't know she was a slave, and you were talking about socialization. So Dr. Nelson asked, how in a world does someone socialized in such a system, slavery, recognize that the system is somehow off? Yeah, if you're still out there, Chris, if you wanted to chime in to let me know if we got it in the right context or where you wanted to go with that question.
Yeah, that was my whole question, and I've been waiting at least a month to talk with Nihan about this.
Oh,
Mm,
so
I think and we want to steer just a couple inches short of social determinism.
mhm.
I think the analysis of societal structures can explain a lot. But for my money, what it can't explain is somebody who is so thoroughly socialized this way. I mean, where's the spark that they finally say, you know what? No, everybody thinks this way, but everybody's wrong.
yeah, that's brave.
Because from my reading of the book, she
Yeah.
doesn't get this from anywhere.
Mhm.
She's even skeptical about her grandmother's Christianity. So how what yeah.
I don't know. I mean, she is to me. We were, I guess, talking with Sean. She's kind of, yes, ahead of her time, and her critical thinking skills it's mind blowing to me. And she, yes, we might think that she didn't probably socialize in a level of she was criticizing. Uh, I don't know. It's a good question, but it might be her ways of understanding is not she's socialized into, but she whatever she I guess learned throughout her maybe first 6 years, and it kind of gave her tools to question more of the system that she is into.
Yeah, what I would
Maybe give some sort of critical thinking skills without realizing.
That's the best answer I've heard so far, and a new argument for early childhood education.
Yeah, definitely. What I would add to that is I would just based on the number of slave revolts, those are major examples, one depicted in this book, Nat Turner's Rebellion, but just from the historical record of minor forms of a rebellion, from working slow, not working as hard, breaking like machinery like cotton gins, putting glass in the bread of their enslavers, acting ignorant, where slaves would act ignorant so they wouldn't have to be expected to do more. All of these things, I would suspect that most enslaved people had an understanding that, yeah, something is definitely off, and would play into what I think a lot of what a lot of philosophers have touched on, people like John Locke, of we understand that we have, we intuitively understand that we have a right to, just based on our behavior, a right to life, a right to our freedom, and a right to our possessions, our things, our property, or a right to even get property, right? And so, but I think what differentiates Harriet is it's definitely a sophisticated, very nuanced, detailed analysis of her life within the system of slavery, and is pointing out the specifics of everything that is wrong with this. We see how it's wrong from just the experience of the enslaved. We see how it is wrong from the experience of the mistress. We see how it is wrong for the experience of the master, of the poor white people who don't have slaves, right? She talks about how these people were ignorant as all get out, right? And she even had kind of fun with them when they came to basically inspect everybody's home, these poor white people that were kind of these slave patrol people. And they brought out the white linens and brought all the nice things out to show that, because obviously these poor white people wouldn't have these nice things in their homes, and and they're untouchable in this circumstance. And so it affects them. A lot of, one of the things that isn't widely known is that most white people didn't own slaves in the South, and those that didn't own were at a tremendous economic disadvantage, right? They just couldn't possibly compete with these big plantation owners. So she was able to see all of how it affected everybody in a very sophisticated, clearly educated manner.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, her critical thinking skills, it was throughout the book, I'm just like, wow. I mean, it's how did she see it? Is I almost want to claim her, she was one of the early sociologists, because the way she is looking at all of these issues, and you can really try to find examples, and in later on concepts that we talk about in sociology. And it's also how I was mentioning in that whole her cross-cultural perspective. She sees different types of stratification. I mean, she doesn't say it that today we talk about it, how I say like slavery, caste, and class and estate, but she just like, yes, then Europe, they're poor. I'm not saying they're doing good, but they have freedom that we wouldn't even have. That is just, she clearly sees there's a major difference between different systems. And it's also what you're mentioning, and United States, what we see, how after slavery ended, that we created the caste system, that people, they don't think is that we had a caste system, but we had it. Like, what is Jim Crow to me? It's a caste system. So that's
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that we did have a caste system, and again, it was, you know, better than, yes, for sure, slavery, but again, that was
Yeah,
you know,
to add to your observation that she was probably, you know, an early practitioner of sociology. I think the choice of her starting this book out by explaining her early childhood, right? She starts it out, I was born a slave, but I never knew it until I was 6 years of happy childhood passed away. She's explaining to the reader, like, I had this model of a life, and then I
yeah.
had this model of a life. Here's a sociological experiment to see what happens when someone is brought up this way and then is projected forward in life to live this way. And so we have this, yeah, this is a sociologist could really just dive in.
No, it is. This
should be assigned to graduate students in sociology.
I know, it should be. No, it was yeah, that what you were saying at the beginning also, I was just saying it. And then it's also she's referring back to, I cannot find it now, is just like, well, my later experience, like early in the book, she explained something, but she just kind of compares to her later experiences, just like, well, whatever it happens here, it wasn't like that. And even this whole how Southerners, they thinking, oh, slavery is such a good system, we're taking care of you people, you know, that whole attitude. And that's, like she says, that was always a lie. And that was something else. It escapes from me. But yeah, she is, I don't know, her comparative skills to critical thinking skills, it's impressive throughout this book. And with the, from religion to the whole marriage, and even you mentioned the marriage, I think is she I think she sees it as a I don't know, what was I gonna say? Oh, no, actually now I'm jumping to something else. You know, when we were talking about that, how Black women's experiences in terms of in the case of slavery, sometimes I start thinking, when I was looking at that, current implications, and current implications that because we still have this sexualizing the woman's bodies, right? But also the Black woman's bodies, or Black woman sexualized in a different way. So apparently, I was recently, that's why, reading this book called Algorithms of Oppression by like Sophia Noble, I guess. She was saying, when you used to put, because she says in these AIs and the system of machine learning, that there's always, you know, prejudice and whatnot. When you put Black girls, Black women, what it pops out most of the time, I mean, she was also doing the studies of this, it was pornography, Black woman pornography. So it's also, when we look at it in this book, in a way, that how she's just like sexually harassed woman, or the Black woman, or they kind of bear children, it was invented, and it's just like how they've been seen. And not many women have, I mean, not many people, and even the mistresses, not having any problems with it. It's a disturbing thing for her. I mean, religiously, maybe one way it is disturbing, in other ways too. And kind of fast forward, that we're still talking about this in digital age. It's, I don't know, you know, we cannot just dismiss, or something is written a long time ago and we don't have no more a slavery. Yes, we don't have, but there's still that lingering elements of prejudice, racism, discrimination, however you want to put it. We still see the elements.
Yeah, I think it's always good to frame these problems in the proper perspective too. Like we could frame this as these are women's issues, but these aren't women's issues necessarily, right? These are men's issues.
Yeah.
The lingering effect of this patriarchy that was able to justify slavery because it's all based on patriarchy. I think that is the lingering effect, that we're still sexualizing women in a way that is for commercial purposes, that is degrading for everybody involved. It's a legacy of unchecked power on men who
Yeah.
feel that that women's bodies are somehow a product that they can consume and at will, right? Based on good deeds. I was nice to this person. I paid for dinner, whatever the case is. I think this is a lingering effect that obviously didn't begin with the antebellum South. I think it goes back a little further than that.
Anyways,
we're still dealing with different manifestations of it, but
different.
It's a continuum.
Yeah.
That's a good word. Okay.
It's a continuum, definitely.
I'll look that up later in my dictionary.
Yeah. Also, this whole conversation is probably illegal in Florida.
Oh, yes, definitely. We'll send it to our brothers and sisters in Florida in mass.
Yeah, I think
this should be the part of the curriculum in K through 12, this talk here.
Well, hey, I mean, it's sociology. It tries to be, a ban. Now I'm worried that Texas could follow after Florida. I mean, since
they have a lot to protect, it seems.
Everybody does everything, and we're the bad guys, the sociologists.
You're just the messenger.
I know we're the messenger, but they think we're the major problem in the society.
It's sort of. Well, it's very much like Cassandra of antiquity, right? You guys are just pointing out that there's troubled times ahead.
Yeah,
of course.
There you go.
I'm just glad you're taking some heat off the philosophers for a minute, so we can do some work.
I know.
Yeah. I try to leave you guys alone when I can, but I'll be putting you to work though in about a month for those students that are still here. I guess we can conclude it here. Thank you very much for your attendance, and Dr. Christopher Nelson and I we're going to have a few more talks with Martha Cantu, who was present earlier here, to finish out this book, and then we're going to have basically a capstone talk with Dr. Nelson. And even though he gave us a talk and we had a discussion about the major themes of Christianity and through this book, we, just like today with sociology, we barely scratched the surface. And so I forget, do you have the date on hand, Chris?
I think it's sometime in April, but you should really bill it as two middle-aged white guys talk about intersectionality.
There we go.
That'll sell some tickets, right?
That is going to be, if you and I ever have a podcast channel together, Chris, that is going to be the name of it. So we'll have that talk. It'll be at the end of April. I'll let all my students know and let my colleagues know. But that'll be a 2-hour talk where we'll really be able to dive into a lot of this. And Chris will definitely elucidate a lot of these themes of religion and how it motivates different characters, and maybe get to this answer that seems to be perplexing you. Where did she get the sense of integrity? Where did she get the sense of direction and the ability of such personal sacrifice despite her circumstances? Which is a good question to ask, a real good question to ask. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Nihan. I really appreciate your time. And I will make this recording available as soon as it's available to me, probably sometime tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Everybody. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sean. Bye.
Take care.
You too.